Georgia is located in the Caucasus and has experienced in its centuries-long checkered past many foreign invaders who have all left their mark. Here, myths and legends have arisen that are still present today, and visitors will encounter them on their visit here from time to time. But the most beautiful story describes the reason why the Georgians live here at all. God had just created the earth and assigned all people to a country except for the Georgians. They had been celebrating and had not paid attention to choosing their future land. Although God was angry about their being late for the process, he succumbed to her charm and gaiety and gave them this land in the Caucasus, which he had actually reserved for himself. Since then, the Georgians have been living in God's own country, the most beautiful mountainous region of the earth, the Caucasus. But if they had known then of the conflict that would happen over the next few centuries between the Great and the Little Caucasus, they would have rejected God's gift and chosen a safer place. Recent excavations show how popular this beautiful land was long ago. In Vanizi, a place near the Armenian border, archaeologists found 1.8 million year old fossils, probably descended from our earliest known ancestors who came from Africa and later inhabited Europe and Asia. There are even two different drawings illustrating how Homo erectus might have appeared back then. In the nearly 2 million years that have passed since then, not only have the people themselves changed, but so much has happened historically that just a few notable events can be mentioned here. Evidence finds that in Georgia the Bronze Age began, partly because the Caucasus Mountains are so rich in minerals and precious metals. The soils of the Colchis lowland in the west and the Transcaucasian Depression in the east are very fertile. It is known that wine was produced there as far back as 5,000 years ago. In a slightly more recent development, Nzkheta stood at the confluence of the Arakvi and Kura as long as 3,000 years ago. The city was Iberia's capital for 1,000 years until the 6th century. Iberia stood next to Colchis for many centuries, a strong kingdom from which the core of the new Georgia later emerged. Christianity also arrived in the 4th century in the form of the young Syrian Nino. It has been Georgia's state religion since the year 337. Then, 3 centuries later, Islam arrived in the Caucasus, and immediately after its founding in the Arabian Peninsula, prompting centuries of occupation and exploitation. Nevertheless, Georgia has defended its Christian faith to this day. Since the separation of the Western Roman from the Eastern churches in 1054, the so-called Oriental Schism, Georgia belongs to the Christian Orthodox Church and follows the old Christian traditions. Nearly 200 years later, in 1236, the east and south were occupied by the Mongols of Genghis Khan and later Tamerlan, making the country sink into anarchy. It was eventually divided into 3 kingdoms. These were repeatedly attacked in the centuries that followed by Persians and Turks and partially occupied. In order to save his people, King Irakli II was forced to place his Kartli-Kakheti kingdom under the protection of his Russian neighbors. The western part of the country was divided into several principalities. Talks began with Peter the Great in the early 18th century, but it wasn't until the Treaty of Georgievsk was signed in 1783 by Catherine the Great that the beginning of more than 200 years of Georgia's dependence on Russia began. In 1801, right after he came to power, Tsar Alexander I issued a manifesto in which Russia incorporated Kartli Kakheti and subjected the Georgian Church to the synodical rule of the Russian Orthodox Church. In the following years, principalities that had been under Turkish rule were annexed by Russia. These areas were merged with the Georgian heartland. The borders with Persia and Turkey shifted for several years. Georgia came under Russian revolutionary turmoil in the early 20th century and declared itself the independent Democratic Republic of Georgia in May 1918. But that independence only lasted 3 years until 1921, when the Soviet leader and native Georgian, Stalin, integrated the Caucasian states, including his homeland, into the Soviet Union. It was the same Stalin who later assassinated tens of thousands of Georgians or sent them into exile without regard for his own countrymen. His rule, as it was in Soviet times, is documented in the old, unchanged museum in Gori. After the Second World War, Georgia experienced an economic boom due to its natural resources and thanks to Soviet industrial development in many areas. Economically, the people were in good shape, there was no unemployment. Georgian products were very popular, as were the country and its people for the tourist industry. Dams were built and those power plants still provide the country with electricity today. Freedom is the title of the new national anthem, which was meant to symbolize the new Georgia after the collapse of the Soviet Union and declaration of independence in 1991. But once again, it turned out quite differently. South Ossetia and Adjara unilaterally declared their independence. Abkhazia followed in 1993, and as a result, Georgia had to take in hundreds of thousands of refugees from there. In 2004, Adjara returned to the motherland. Abkhazia and South Ossetia are still considered Georgian parts of the country. The road sign on the highway lists the Abkhaz capital Sukhumi as if it is within reach of Georgians. By 2004, corruption and chaos ruled while incompetent civil servants embezzled public property and ruined equipment. Due to the Russian market being out of reach, unemployment rose to over 10%. Many qualified Georgians had emigrated. The Rose Revolution of 2003 ended the volatile situation as well as the term of former President Shevardnadze. The opposition led by Mikhail Saakashvili won the election in 2004 and immediately began sweeping reforms that led to annual growth rates of 7%. After 2 terms, Saakashvili was not allowed to run again. The opposition coalition of billionaire Georgian Dream candidate Ivanishvili won with an absolute majority, and since 2013, Georgi Margvelashvili has been president. Because this country, with its rich history and varied past, as well as natural beauty and friendly people, aroused our interest, we traveled to Georgia in September 2014. We booked the trip with the agency Georgia Insight, one of the best travel agencies of Georgia. It was planned and prepared by Tamuna Kuprashvili, this charming young travel agent. Our driver was Gela, very experienced, careful, and always ready to make a warm and collegial toast during dinners. David, a guide who speaks perfect German, was a charming, well-informed, well-regarded, and always good-humored Georgian, exactly as he appears here between Valentina and Elena in a typical pose. In addition to traveling with Valentina and Elena, I also served as the man behind the camera, Peter Sänger.